Right. So now that we kind of understand the basics of scripting, the majority of learning the rest of it is to keep making new things and mess around with stuff. Like that one video isn't going to tell you how to use everything, and these subsequent ones won't teach you how to do anything like that. The best thing you can do is search things that you want to do on Google, watch videos and tutorials, or just read the Unity documentation. Their API is actually pretty decent, and you can look through. They give you examples on how you would use some functions or methods, and it's pretty good. But for today, for starters, we're gonna look at a few important things we want to do here. One, now that we got our scene as is, we got our ball and stuff, we're going to want to, one, make a character, two, have the player move around the character, and three, have the player actually interact with the world to cause something. All right, so first thing we want to do here, I'm going to right click in here. Actually, before we even make a player, I'm just going to deactivate this ball. We don't really need to play around with it right now. And one thing to note, so the ball is deactivated right now. That means all these scripts that will act on the ball won't actually do anything because the ball is deactivated. Basically, that means that any functions or scripts inside these deactivated objects won't do anything. They don't do much. Like they won't activate at all. So if you have a script that says it deactivates itself and you want to reactivate it, it won't be able to reactivate itself because that whatever function you call as a part of the deactivated object will never get called because it counts as not being towards, it's not in the scene once it's deactivated. Excuse me. All right, so let's go ahead and make a player for this. I guess this is a decent size, but I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger, just so we have something to play around with. And let me just move this out the way. That's fine. That's perfect. Okay, so we got our floor set up. I'm going to show you guys another thing real quick. I'm going to create another folder in here. I'm going to call it materials. So you know how in this area here, there's a material here, and there's just the default material on the thing. We're going to make our own, and we're just going to go to create, go to material. I'm going to name this floor. And you can change a bunch of stuff in material. You can make it metallic if you want. I'm going to make the floor, let's make it like a dark magenta. I kind of like the look of that. And then what you can do is you can drag it and put it on whatever you want in the scene. I actually like that a lot. It's a good color. And you can actually mess around with it and make it metallic so that way in the lighting it'll be more reflective. You can make it smooth, and these change kind of things here. You can do you can add in a normal map, a height map, occlusion, all these things. If you know how to do materials in like a renderer, like Maya or Blender, then you kind of know what these things are. And you can kind of mess around with that and customize them as you would wish. And then you can just drag them to whatever you want. All right, now that we got our floor, I'm going to create a 3D capsule. A capsule is literally just like a sphere or a cube. It's just a shape. It's like just a basic geometry. The difference you see here in my right side of my inspector, you see that this capsule has a capsule collider inspector. If it wasn't clear before, capsule collider in the inspector. If it wasn't clear before, the difference between a capsule collider, sphere collider, box collider, all those colliders, is just the shape. They all function exactly the same. So that's going to be our player. We can actually change the height and stuff. If I click Edit Collider, you can see we can actually move things around. I can make it higher. I can actually change it outside of the object itself. I'm not going to do that, though. We're just going to keep it like that. I'm going to make another material so that way we can differentiate. I'm going to call this the player. And we'll make him blue. I don't like that color. That's nice. Nope, not blue. Let's make him yellow. That way it clashes against the magenta. Perfect. And we're going to create as a part of him, I'm going to rename him as player. And I'm going to tag him as player. Just so we know this is our main player that's in our scene right now. And what I'm going to do here is that as a child of him, I'm going to create a a cube. I'm going to give him a hat. And I'm just going to change the way it is. Oops. Like a nice little hat for him. Where is it? Yeah, there we go. Change it out like that. Perfect. There we go. Like a visor in front of the little pizza box hat. Okay, so we got our player with his hat, with his fancy little hat. And this is what the object that we're gonna move around basically. I'm gonna add a rigid body. Remember, rigid body means that this thing has force acted upon it. And if I press play, it falls and hits the ground. It's pretty funny, actually, and I like the hat that we added, kind of changes that stuff. But basically, we're going to want to make it so that way he can't rotate on the Z or the X. We only want him to rotate via our Y axis. So if I click play now, he doesn't rotate. But he will rotate along the Y axis, which is what we want. Okay, now that we have that, let's actually make the scripts we need. So I'm going to right-click in our scripts folder. I'm going to click Create, C# script. I'm going to call this third-person movement. And I'm going to create, well, Visual Studio will set that up for me. Thank you, Visual Studio. It's going to compile. I'm going to right-click again. Going to create another C# script. I'm going to call this third-person camera. Okay. Thank you, Visual Studio. Appreciate that. So let's do the camera first. Okay, so I'm gonna get through this. So first, we're gonna want some kind of rotation, right? This rotation speed, the speed at which we want our camera to actually rotate. We'll just keep this for 1 for right now. We're gonna make that public, so that way we can change that if we would want. And then we're going to make a public float mouse X, mouse Y. These are basically, I'll make them separate. And then public float mouse Y. Great. So basically, this is going to be the input from our mouse, whether or not it moves up and down or left and right, and we're going to get those values. And then we're going to do a float. No, actually, yeah, we're just gonna keep it like that. And we're going to actually make another thing, call that a transform. We're gonna make that the player. All right. So let's do a few things. So if we want a third-person camera controller, that means we don't want our mouse to be able to move freely. So what we're going to do is make cursor. This is a static thing that calls like whatever the cursor is in Unity, like the mouse. We're going to click lock state, and you can see here as a property, it says it determines whether the hardware pointer is locked at the center of the view, constrained to the window, or not constrained at all. By default, it's not constrained at all. But what we want to do is actually make this to cursor mode. You can see automatically here, there's confined, locked, and none. None is the free form. We want to make this locked. Like it can't move around. It's just stuck in the center of the screen. It's still detects the data, but it just won't move. And then we also just don't want to look at it. We don't want to make sure it's there. So we click cursor visible, make that equal to false. So the cursor actually has like these things, and you can actually change the cursor that you want if you want a custom one. But this is how we would do things like that. Next up, in our update function, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to make a function call here. And I'm going to do camera public void camera setup, camera rotation. And then in this function, basically what we're going to do is that we're going to call mouse x, or make that to plus equal input dot get access. So right now what I'm doing is that I'm calling our float variable, and I'm saying the input is this another public API of Unity's that is a static, and you can get all the kinds of inputs for your keyboard, your mouse, all these things. So if a player says, the player presses the spacebar, input dot get key, or get button, or get key, one of the two, and then it says either a key code or the name. So I could do space, in other words, give me the space bar if that's the name of it, or I could do key code, and you can see here it has all the keys on your keyboard. So I could do key code dot space, and that would tell me whether or not the space key has been pressed, and that's what that means. So get access is basically a thing for the mouse. So if I do get access, and then what does this need? I believe this needs a string. I'm going to call this mouse x. And we're going to do times rotation speed, so how fast we want to do it. And then we do the same thing for mouse y. Plus equals, minus equals, because it's mouse inputs on the y-axis are actually reversed. So we do input.getAccess, mouse y. So this basically keeps track of the values that we've put in so far. Rotation speed. Now, in most games you can go all around, but there's something called Gimbal Lock, which basically prevents the mouse from working as you want it to. So in order to fix that from happening, what we can do is our Y movement, if we want to look up and down, we can do something where we clamp that value. So we do mouse Y equals math f dot clamp. And we say mouse Y, giving you the value and the minimum and the maximum that this thing can actually be. We'll say -30 and +60. So that means I can go down up to a 30-degree angle or go up to a 60-degree angle. So that's good. So now that we have the Y and X values we want, what we can do is, first off, we can change our rotation. So the camera, we're putting this on the camera object, right? So what we can do in that case is do this. Target, or rather player dot rotation is equal to quaternion. So rotations is a property of transform, right? And a quaternion basically is how we represent rotations in 3D math. So quaternion dot Euler, because these are 30 and 60 are Euler angles, and we want to convert that to a quaternion. So we'll do quaternion dot Euler, and we give it the values we have. So we have mouse Y, mouse X, and then 0 for the Z. We're not rotating on the Z axis, right? And then what we're doing is that we're calling game object, remember the object that this is currently rotated on, dot transform dot rotation is equal to quaternion dot Euler. Oh, my bad. The player is actually supposed to be 0, because we don't want to move the player up and down with us. We just want the player to be static in the y-axis. But we do want to make mouse Y, mouse X, and then 0 for the game object. And this is just a function that can get called every frame in update. So let's try that out. So now let's add that to the camera. So we made third person camera. And then player, we'll drag in the player. So you can see in the game, as I'm moving the camera around, the player also moves. But we want the player to move alongside the camera, right? So there's a few ways you can do that. You can actually make the camera a child of the player. And you can see that it does actually move with the player, but the player looks like it's static, right? It doesn't quite do it the way we want it to. So we notice that we have the camera in the player, right? But what I can do, I can create an empty in the player, make it to where, like, where the hat is. Call that player reference. Because we know that's part of the player. So we make that camera a child of that. And then in here, in our script, public transform, player reference. So now that we have that, what we can do is this, right? So after mouse Y, what we can do is that game object.transform, getting the transform of the current object this is attached to, dot look at, which is a function. And this function rotates the object so it points towards whatever you want it to. It basically rotates it in a way that it changes its forward vector is immediately pointing towards the center of whatever you're referencing. So we'll do that to player reference. So that way, before anything else, we can do all that. And instead of actually changing the rotation of the camera, we change the rotation of our project. So that way the rotations are separate and it should work way better. So if I do player reference dot rotation is equal to that. And then here on our camera, if I change the player reference, actually no, this is exactly how we want it to work out. So this means, so that's not in the front of our player. I got to actually rotate our player a bit. So that way it's facing the front. The hat is not quite how we want the front to be, the orient. So I change that to this way, move it like that, move it up a bit, go to game over here. So now our player is always face the direction of whatever our camera is. The hat is a little crooked, I'll admit. So I probably should fix that. Make it straight 180 for rotation. And then, let's see. Player reference is good where it is. Camera. If I move it so that way it's centered, so if I change the X, there we go. So now if I click play, we're basically facing everything. Clips through the bottom because we don't have a detection for whatever we're hitting. That's fine. We don't need this to be perfect, just to get it working. So you can see it works as we want it to right now. But say we actually want to make it so that way you can actually move the camera independently. We can do something else here. So what we can do is this. We're going to use another input here. So after we will do the look at, if we do if input dot get key, and then we'll make this our right click. Well, I believe that's actually in not get key dot. I believe it is get mouse button. And then we can do input dot mouse. I believe the button is 1. I think that's right click. Let me check the Unity documentation real quick. Yes, it is 1. So basically 1 is our right click. So I'm gonna put a comment. Right click. We can do the target dot rotation. So basically this rotation here, this player rotation, we don't do. The reference we don't do. I mean the player we don't rotate. We do rotate our reference, which is where the camera is. Now that we have that, it's good. Then once that's all good, and then for our else Else, if we're not clicking it, we do want to move our player. This is basically making it so that way the mouse and player are independent if we press the right click. So here's what I'm going to do. Like, press play. So we look at everything. I want to hold right click now. You can see it actually rotates independently, and as soon as you let go of it, it will flip back to the way we're facing. So as I'm going around, right click, independent, left click, goes back. And that is the move around for our camera. Now let's do the movement. The movement is actually very, very simple. The camera was the hard part. So let's open up movement. Now movement is going to be placed on the character itself. So let's do a speed for how we want to do. For how we want it. And then we're going to, in our update, we don't actually need start, we don't need to initialize anything. In our update, what we're going to do is similar to how we got the input from the mouse, the left and the right, the horizontal and vertical. We're going to do the same thing here. So horizontal, spelled incorrectly. Yes. Horizontal is going to be input.getAxis horizontal. Horizontal. Right. Then we have float vertical is equal to input.getAxis vertical. And then vector 3 vec is equal to new vector 3 or horizontal 0 because we're not moving on the y, and then vertical, which basically means up and down, which is our z axis, and then times the speed, and then times time.delta time. Now this is important. This is basically meaning that our movement is now independent of frames, of framing, of frame data, and time.delta time is going to help out with a couple of things. And now we have a vector that we created, basically the direction that we want to move, right? It's kind of like a point, is this vector that we just created. Like, if you imagine everything on a plane, the input that we're getting is like pointing to where we want to go. So now that we have the direction, all we have to do is translate it. So transform.translate our vec, then space.self, so relative to us, basically. That save, click on that, and then on player, all we have to do is add component, third player movement, make the player speed equal to 1. So now, let's up that. So you'll see that I'm actually moving around, and that's because input.getAxis, these axes I'm getting, isn't the mouse, but rather are my WASD keys or the arrows. So I can do that, and I can actually move independently of the mouse, of the camera. And you see I fall down now. I'm going to fall down infinitely. But that's our basic, basic camera and movement. And with that, we'll see you guys later. We're going to be doing more advanced stuff in the next video, but that's our player for right now. See you guys there.